What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar Flags here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. I was born in the year 2002, and from a very young age, I was a massive roller coaster fan. From as young as I could remember, I was playing Roller Coaster Tycoon on my family's computer. By the time I was 9 years old, around the year 2011, I figured out the roller coaster community and some YouTube channels as well as websites that talk about common interests in rides, roller coasters, and stories surrounding the industry. It's crazy to think that over 10 years have passed since I started getting into roller coasters, but I'm going to look back at the year 2012. Even though I was younger and my coaster count was a lot smaller, I kept track of coaster news stories, kept track of the new coasters coming out, and remember all of those events, honestly, like it was yesterday. I know a lot of you guys are around my age, or slightly younger, or slightly older, but I've ran into a lot of enthusiasts that didn't get into roller coasters until around 2016, 2017, or even later. So, for the people that don't know, or for the people that know and watch it for the fun of it, this is Cedar Flags, and today, I will be looking at what it was like to be an enthusiast in 2012, and compare it with an enthusiast in 2022. Now, when it comes to new for 2012 coasters, there were a few shining stars out there, and the main one in North America at least was Leviathan at Canada's Wonderland. This was the first ever B&M Giga coaster, and the fourth roller coaster to come out with a full circuit that would be considered a Giga. The hype for this roller coaster was absolutely legit, and many people called this the best roller coaster in the world when it first came out. Surprisingly, at the same time, Shambhala at Port Aventura came out. At the time, Shambhala was the tallest coaster in the entire continent of Europe, and was by far the tallest B&M Hyper. Another one to come out in 2012 was Skyrush at Hershey Park. A roller coaster I remember to have mixed reviews from the beginning. This was a big deal for the park in its future forward, as it was their first coaster over 200 feet, but it wouldn't be the last. Now, I think something funny, and for the people that weren't around in the community during 2012, for some reason, I remember people liking Leviathan a lot more than Skyrush. It seemed like floater airtime was more of the general consensus back then. Wodan Timber Coaster at Europa Park was a pretty big deal because it was the first wooden coaster at Europa Park. And let me tell you, this ride gets some great reviews. This GCI over in Germany is a very fast-paced ride, and intertwines with Blue Fire, that we are definitely going to be talking about later. The last few I want to talk about are actually a pair of roller coasters, X-Flight at Six Flags Great America and Wild Eagle at Dollywood. These came out in 2012 and were the first B&M wings in the United States. This was a big deal at the time, as it was a brand new model by B&M that came out the year prior, and got a lot of initial hype. Even though the reviews on it have gone down over the years as hype has faded, it was still a massive deal to have these two in the country, and have the two others to come in the near future. So, we've looked at individual roller coasters, but now let's look at manufacturers of these rides, and where they were 10 years ago compared to now. A big trend that I've realized from the companies from 2012 until now is that they have grown and matched with the big two. Now, what's the big two? Intamin and B&M. Nowadays, if you ask someone what the biggest manufacturers are, they might say a mixed variety of things. But back in 2012, you would be hard-pressed not to find someone who wouldn't say Intamin and B&M. These were the two main companies by far. No manufacturer, and I mean no other manufacturer, came remotely close. Intamin and B&M ruled the coaster industry. And while they still do to an extent today, look at the average coaster enthusiast's top 10. Is it completely filled with B&Ms and Intamins? Well, there are definitely some on the list, but nowhere near as many as there would be 10 years ago. In Mitch Hawker's 2012 Steel Coaster poll, all but one wasn't one of these two. But now, other companies have risen to the power, and most people nowadays would rather ride a modern Vekoma or an RMC than a slower B&M Hyper such as Nitro at Great Adventure or Apollo's Chariot at Busch Gardens. To further prove this, in the 2021 Vote Coasters poll, well, 5 out of 10 are B&M and Intamin, while the other 5 are other manufacturers such as Mock Rides and Rocky Mountain Construction. It really proves to you the diversity that has grown, and that these two really don't have that much of a monopoly anymore, since companies have tried to spend less and become more creative on their designs. One of them, especially in Europe and Asia, is Vekoma. Vekoma back then was just hated. No one liked Vekoma back then. In fact, people just liked to hate Vekoma to hate it. It was like the Justin Bieber of roller coaster manufacturers. They were mainly known for their SLCs and boomerangs at that point in time, and they all had the old restraints with bad profiling, and let me just say, they have definitely improved on their company stance now. They have built new world-class thrills all across the planet, and refurbished some old rides to make them less, well, painful. Now with Mach rides, they were already starting the upturn that they had in the 2010s. In 2009, they came out with Blue Fire, which was a prototype of their thrilling multi-launch coaster model. And let me say, this model really turned Mach rides from a small family manufacturer to a major world-class manufacturer. This has grown into so many great rides like Copperhead Strike, Helix, Icon, and so many more, and it has definitely grown immensely. We have Mach thrilling coasters all over the world now, and back then, the only one to look at was Blue Fire. And even though that was 3 years old by 2012, we were still looking at it, maybe poking it with a stick and saying, hey, do something. And well, it did. Premier Rides has a very similar story to Mach Rides. They came out with a brand new model called the Skyrocket, or at least a series of models. In 2010, they came out with their first Skyrocket model, the Skyrocket prototype at Kennywood, and then the aforementioned Skyrocket 2 came out, which really blew up. Ever since then, they came out with the Skyrocket 3 and many other Skyrocket models. This has influenced so many other manufacturers and put Premier on the map once again like they were back in the 1990s. Now, if there's one company that's changed immensely in the past 10 years, it is Rocky Mountain Construction. And Rocky Mountain Construction might be the very reason Intamin and B&M aren't the big two anymore. Out of that Vogue Coasters poll, most of those other 5 were from RMC. But back then, RMC only had one coaster, and that was New Texas Giant. I remember when New Texas Giant came out, and it opened to absolute rave reviews, but none of us knew what the future of this company would hold. The hype that would follow in the next decade brought some new world-class screen machines that were never imagined in the past. RMC has really influenced most of the 2010s as a whole, and has created a whole new genre of roller coasters. If someone told me 10 years ago today that in 5, 6, 7 years, there would be a company that would rival B&M and Intamin, I would have said there's no way. But companies like RMC, Mach Rides, even companies like S&S, they have succeeded and are possibly up there with the big two. Finally, we're going to look at what has changed. What has changed in the past 10 years, and what makes an enthusiast in 2012 different than an enthusiast nowadays? Well, let's look at some factors. Obviously, the first factor is COVID. In 2022, we are in the middle of a very historic pandemic, and in 2012, I guess there was Bieber fever. Social media has also changed immensely. When I created my first Cedar Flags account in 2012 on YouTube, well, there was really nothing. And when I created my Instagram account in 2014, there were a few accounts, maybe a few hundred at the most, but now there are thousands, if not tens of thousands. There are so many YouTubers that talk about rides now, so many Instagrammers, so many Twitter accounts. It's honestly insane. Because back then, outside of Theme Park Review and Coaster Force, you weren't really watched. But now we have all these commentators that didn't exist back then, and it really is a great way to connect with the community. I also feel like ride layouts have changed a lot since then. Ever since the creation of the Skyrocket 2, we've seen a revival in the multi-pass launch, and we see these coming up at thrill coasters everywhere. We've seen some new elements such as the outward bank turn, the wave turn, and, well, many other bizarre elements with weird names. Back then, if you asked the average enthusiast what their favorite type of coaster is, they'd probably say something like the most thrilling, the tallest, maybe something that had the most airtime. But nowadays, people are probably going to say either the most intense or the most low-to-the-ground fast-paced coaster. People have grown to love fast-paced rides more than anything, and that is the gold standard. Back then, it seemed like people's favorite coaster at Great Adventure was Nitro, as opposed to El Toro. Which sounds crazy now, but many people like that massive thrill of floater airtime rather than the insane rush of ejector. Sure, many people like Toro, but Nitro back then, my goodness, it had a massive following. Now, I was thinking about this, and this is insane to me. Back in 2012, there was not a single wooden coaster that went upside down. In 2013, that changed with both Hades 360 and Outlaw Run, but ever since then, the wooden coaster inversion craze has gone crazy. One I mentioned in the manufacturers category is the rise of underdog companies such as Mock Rides, Vekoma, and even companies like Gerstlauer and Premier Rides. They have really shown a spot of their own in the top coasters in the world. But finally, I want to talk about parks. Kentucky Kingdom was SB&O at this time. Closed by Six Flags and abandoned by it, it was a wasteland at this point. Energylandia, the massive park in Poland, was a cornfield. And Hollywood Studios in Orlando, Florida, was almost unrecognizable compared to how it is today. Also, Fun Spot in Orlando was known as Fun Spot Action Park, and Fun Spot Kissimmee only had 2 coasters, their Wild Mouse now known as Galaxy Spin, and an E&F Myler kiddie coaster. Unbelievable. In the 2010s, we definitely saw a trend of theme parks purchasing smaller manufacturers, and smaller manufacturers trying to compete with the big boys. And I really think it sparked a great idea in the coaster community. But anyways, if you lived in this time period as an enthusiast, let me know what you think. What was your favorite coaster back then? My favorite was Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood. Still in my top 20, an incredible ride. I will never forget my first ride on this back in 2011. Anyways, this is Cedar Flags, and I will see you all later.